Have you noticed that the more clearly you see, the less people want to listen? It's like intelligence became a curse. You speak the truth, and people take it personally. You point out the obvious, and they call you arrogant. You try to help, and somehow you end up excluded. It's not an exaggeration. Society was built to protect illusions, not to welcome clarity. And if you see too much, you feel too much, and they feel too seen. You're not complicated. You're dangerous to those still asleep. But what if I told you there's a quiet way to flip the script, without yelling, without forcing, just by using what you already have, in a way no one expects? Today you'll learn why disappearing might be your greatest weapon, and how absence, silence, and mystery can make you the most powerful person in the room, even when you're not in it. There is a specific kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from seeing too clearly. People who perceive too much often end up connecting too little. Or rather, they realize most people don't want to see. And the more you try to share that clarity, the more it feels like you're speaking a foreign language. You walk into a room, scan everything in seconds, and still choose silence. Why? Because you've learned that showing intelligence without strategy triggers the worst in others. People don't fear the truth. They fear what it can dismantle, the image they've built of themselves. And just like that, you become the villain for seeing too much. Schopenhauer said that sharpened awareness is a curse, and eventually you see why. That sentence you said without malice, that obvious insight no one asked for, that honest moment, all of it gets taken as offense by those living behind masks. Behavior shifts, smiles vanish. What should have been dialogue turns into defensiveness. But not from your side, from theirs. Because your presence becomes a mirror. And nobody likes being emotionally exposed. So, you start practicing detachment. Not from ideas, but from expectations. Because deep down, you realize it's not rejection. It's self-protection. Society wasn't built to reward those who see too much. It rewards those who adapt, who repeat, who blend in without disrupting. When you show power without control, it's seen as a threat. When you expose clarity without timing, it comes off as arrogance. And that's where real skill comes in. Controlling not just what you say, but when and to whom. The mind doesn't need more space. It needs more strategy. You don't have to explain everything all the time. Sometimes the strongest influence is acting like you're not trying at all. Because the louder you are, the easier it is to ignore you. But mystery, that sticks. In ego-driven environments, silence is resistance. But not just any silence, intentional silence. The kind that doesn't stem from fear, but from control. The kind that watches without judgment, but with precision. Intelligent people pick up what others avoid. They notice tension in the air. They read micro-expressions. They hear the spaces between words. And that's exactly why they need to train themselves not to react to everything, not to explain themselves constantly. Because the world isn't ready for that kind of sharpness. The world prefers comfort. It prefers illusions. And those who threaten that become threats. Maybe you've felt this too, being too right, in a place where collective wrongness is more comfortable, having too many ideas in a space that prefers mediocrity. And it wears you down. It makes you think you're too much. That maybe you should dim your mind. But no, you don't need to hide your intelligence. You need to protect it. You need to choose where to plant it, because a sharp mind on barren ground only cuts roots, and that never bears fruit. The real game starts when you stop trying to be understood and start understanding the game. Want an example? Think of someone you know, brilliant but rarely noticed, says little, thinks deeply, observes everything, but rarely steps in. That person isn't passive, they're calculated. They know that the most powerful kind of influence isn't loud, It settles in, like invisible gravity that shifts the atmosphere without asking permission. That's control. That's applied perception. And let me tell you, it's far harder than simply being smart, because it demands emotional discipline. And self-control is a rare form of power in today's world. Clarity, when poorly timed, turns into noise. People don't hear what you were saying. They hear what their ego allows them to process. That's why you have to calibrate your presence. Adjust your intensity. Add layers. Not out of fakeness, but wisdom. Because those who show everything too soon lose their value. It's like being an open book no one bothers to read, but the subtle, the slowly revealed, the unspoken, that stays, that intrigues, that makes people seek you even when you're gone. And that is real influence. Now breathe. Stop for a second and reflect. How many times were you silenced? Just for being too clear? How many doors closed not because you were wrong, but because you were right too early? That's not insanity. That's a pattern. One only the perceptive can see. And that's why the first step is into changing your mind. Is learning how to use it like an artist plays with light and shadow, with timing, with restraint, with control. Because at the end of the day, the problem was never your mind. It was how brightly it shines in a world still learning how to see. But there's a way to change the rules, and it begins not by showing more, but by hiding better. Some of the greatest minds in history had one thing in common. They looked ordinary. That's no accident. It's precision. People who truly master the game don't seek attention, they deflect it. They trade brilliance for mystery, genius for humility. And here's the secret. The more you know, the less you look like you do. Not because you lack confidence, but because you understand strategy. Those who constantly try to look smart are still trying to prove something. But those who've grasped the power of invisibility don't need to be admired. Schopenhauer called it a shield against the herd. Because most people don't want leaders, they want mirrors, and anything that challenges that triggers ego. That's why real thinkers move in silence. They ask basic questions. Let others explain the obvious. Not out of ignorance, out of awareness. They know ego is fragile. And often, real power lies in letting others feel like they're in charge. Simplicity becomes a disguise. And disguise becomes armor. The result? Freedom to move through a system that tries to box everyone in. Take a corporate setting, for example. While everyone's trying to look indispensable, the sharpest one is watching, studying the flow, learning the code. They don't clash, they collect. They're not chasing visibility, they're gathering information. And when they finally speak, it's surgical. No long speeches, no emotional defenses, just presence. Because power doesn't come from noise, it comes from clarity. And the more you master silence, the more influence you quietly generate. No grand entrance needed. The cloak of simplicity is like a magic trick. It lets you walk through tension unnoticed, enter ego-drenched spaces without setting off alarms. It's like the warrior who knows how to fight, but chooses to look harmless. Those who underestimate you reveal their blind spots. And that's the gift, to be seen as small while standing inches from their flaws. So don't rush to correct people. Sometimes, real control is in letting them be wrong, in acting surprised, in pretending to learn something that you mastered years ago. Want to apply this in your life? Start with this. Talk less, listen more. When someone explains something obvious, smile and say, "Interesting, I hadn't thought of it that way." That's not dishonesty. That's discipline. That's choosing where to spend your energy. And remember, people with low self-worth confuse silence with submission. But you're not surrendering. You're positioning. And when the moment comes, your words will change the room. Because while they were busy talking, you were preparing to win. There's a certain kind of behavior that confuses everyone. the quiet one who always delivers. No bragging, no competition, no spotlight. Yet somehow everything they touch works. That's true influence. Not the kind that begs for applause, the kind that rewrites outcomes without asking. Their authority doesn't live in what they say, it lives in what they are, in the weight of their presence, even when silent. Because silence, when it comes from someone who knows, is louder than any argument. The cloak of simplicity is not deception, it's a conscious choice. It's knowing that showing everything you know right away only inflates insecure egos. It's like playing chess and opening with checkmate. Sure, it's impressive, but it ruins the game. The real master moves slowly, measures each step, makes it look like they're losing, until the board flips, and suddenly, those who thought they were ahead are gone. That's not manipulation, that's art. That's strategy in its purest form. That's clarity, dressed as modesty. And here owls where most people give up. They think they have to be constantly seen to prove their worth. But the truth is the opposite. The less predictable you are, the more your presence matters. Scarcity creates desire. Mystery creates influence. And that's why the next step will feel counterintuitive. It'll take courage. Because you're not just hiding your brilliance now. You're vanishing with it. And when that happens, the game isn't visible anymore. It becomes silent, invisible, lethal. Disappearing might seem like weakness to someone who's never had to protect themselves. But those with sharp minds know disappearance is often the last place where freedom still exists. It's not escape. It's a strategic retreat. A rare form of detachment that only those with true ego control can master. While the world shouts, posts, reacts, and performs, you vanish. And in that absence, something changes. Because when you leave by choice, people don't forget you. They start feeling you. You don't just exit the room, you haunt it. Funny thing is, the more people see you, the less they value what they see. The more available you are, the easier it is to be overlooked. But when you disappear, the narrative shifts. People start wondering, imagining, projecting. Mystery takes over, and quiet control enters the room. Think of the sniper, the strategist, the artist who vanishes for months, then returns with one move that rewrites everything. They don't disappear by accident. They leave to reshape the game. Because what's overexposed loses power, and what's felt in absence lingers. This kind of vanishing isn't empty, it's calculated. You're choosing where your energy goes. Social media, pointless meetings, draining conversations, all of it becomes noise. And when you stop placing yourself where your presence is wasted, you start building authority, not through visibility, through rarity. Disappearing requires confidence, and confidence is born from no longer needing to be understood. That's emotional intelligence. That's clarity without the craving. That's mastery of your own behavior in a world addicted to reaction. Want a practical way to test this? Pick one space where you're always visible, and disappear from it for a few days. Watch what changes. Who notices? Who doesn't? Who reaches out? The reactions will teach you everything. More importantly, you'll feel the weight lift. The peace of not being expected to show up for every little thing. And then it clicks. Your presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. You choose when to give it. You choose how much. And the moment you do, people stop expecting and start adjusting. Schopenhauer said the world is a stage where most people have no idea what they are doing, but are terrified of leaving the spotlight. But the real master knows. When you control your own exit, you control the entire scene. Sometimes the best move isn't to push forward, it's to pull back, to starve their attention, to disrupt their rhythm with a calculated void, because in that empty space, the impact is amplified. Noise is forgettable. Silence, that stays. Picture someone who was always around, always speaking, always participating. Then suddenly, gone. No reason, no explanation, just silence. And in that silence, curiosity, conversations, speculation, people start asking questions. And that curiosity is the birthplace of influence. Because when people want to know where you went, the game has already changed. And here's the twist. You didn't have to do anything. Just leave, intentionally, with clarity. And let the silence do the talking. A mind that knows when to disappear becomes a threat in any room, because no one can predict it. That kind of intentional invisibility disarms people. You become the variable they can't control, the one thing they didn't account for. And suddenly, they're watching you closer, measuring your patterns, waiting for your next move. That's influence without effort, presence built from absence. And those who master that never beg for space again. They are the space. They move the board. They return only when it matters. And when they do, everything shifts. But here's the most powerful part. When you learn to disappear without drama, without announcements, without explanation, you rebuild, away from the noise, away from the projections, away from the pull of everyone else's expectations. And when you return, you're different. Not because you changed, but because they finally have to see you with fresh eyes. And in that re-seeing, you gain power. Power to influence. Power to choose. And the rarest power of all, to be remembered, even in your silence. But what if you didn't just disappear? What if you haunted the room? There's a kind of presence that dominates without noise. A figure who, even in silence, shifts the atmosphere. People talk, laugh, explain themselves, and suddenly realize someone is watching, not interrupting, not judging, just there. The ghost in the room. That person who says little but carries weight, who doesn't fight for attention, yet is impossible to ignore. This kind of influence doesn't come from speaking, it comes from perception. And what scares the ego more than someone who sees without saying what they see? In this space, silence isn't absence, it's a tool. While everyone's rushing to speak, justify, impress, the ghost observes, gathers data, maps patterns, and that behavior unsettles people, because predictable people are easy to manage. But the unreadable, the ones who don't reveal themselves, they disrupt the flow. They make others self-correct without a single word. That's not intimidation, it's reflection. A reflection of how powerful silent presence is in a world that's not used to clarity. Want to understand how real this is? Picture a meeting. Everyone's tossing opinions around. Some interrupt, some show off. But there's one person, still, focused, precise. They don't dominate. Yet everyone notices them. And what's wild, sometimes they don't even speak. But when they don't, their absence is felt louder than most voices. What did they think? That question echoes long after. That echo is where real authority lives. Because sometimes, the most powerful voice in the room is the one that didn't speak. This works because human behavior is emotionally reactive. Most people talk to escape discomfort. But the one who controls discomfort controls the dynamic. The ghost doesn't win verbal battles. They've already won by not engaging. And that builds mystery. And mystery pulls people in. Because what isn't obvious demands interpretation. And anything that requires effort to understand becomes valuable. The less people can predict you, the more they start watching closely. And trying to understand turns into silent admiration. Schopenhauer understood this. He said the less you reveal, the more people project. And projection is powerful. Because while others expose themselves, you become a mirror. And everyone paints their own version of you. Is that manipulation? No. That's space. Space to be complex. Space to be strategic. The world is full of loud performers trying to be relevant. But the one who stays quiet and still shifts the behavior around them plays a different game. One where silence is a symbol, and absence becomes influence. This kind of energy isn't easily forgotten, because it touches something words can't reach. The ghost in the room doesn't need the center. They command the edges. Their invisibility is control, their neutrality, a weapon. And while others try to seem important, the ghost becomes unavoidable, because it's impossible not to notice someone who shifts the air by simply existing. They're a living reminder that authority doesn't yell, it settles in. And it settles without trying. Practicing this takes discipline. You have to break the urge to justify, to talk just to fill the silence. You have to get comfortable with pauses until they feel like home. Here's something to try. Next time you're in a charged conversation, pause. Wait 2 seconds before responding. Watch what they do. Notice how silence changes the pace. Eventually, you will see that control doesn't belong to the loudest, but to the one who chooses when to speak. And more importantly, who knows when silence already said enough. And once you become the ghost, something shifts. People start adjusting just because you're there. They measure their words, edit themselves, correct things you haven't even mentioned. But the real magic? When you're not there, and your name still lingers. What would they think? Would they approve this? That post-absence presence, that's peak influence. And you didn't have to push. You didn't have to force. But what if you weren't just remembered? What if you became untouchable? There comes a point in every self-aware person's journey when they realize disappearing isn't enough. True power lies in becoming unreachable, not out of pride, but out of choice. You no longer need to defend yourself. You've stopped proving. You've seen enough of human behavior to know that the most dangerous game is the one that drains you emotionally. So you step back, not with bitterness, but with clarity. You level up. You're no longer playing. You've become the standard. While everyone reacts, you observe. While they seek to be seen, you decide who gets to see you. Being unreachable isn't about hiding. It's about elevating your presence. It means understanding that real authority doesn't belong to those who are loud, but to those whose absence changes everything. Your energy becomes selective. You don't join every conversation. You don't comment on everything. And slowly, people stop looking to you for validation and start fearing the silence when you don't show up, because they've realized you don't return to mind games. Your silence is now a filter, and mystery, your protection. Most people live trapped in emotional reaction loops, always defending, proving, pleasing, but the unreachable one, he doesn't play that game. He knows anything forced loses value, so he lets the world spin, watches the chaos, but doesn't enter it. And because of that, he becomes magnetic. In a world where everyone's yelling, the one who stays calm rules. Clarity becomes silence. Silence becomes presence. And that presence becomes unbearable for those addicted to your attention. To be unreachable is to live with strategy. You look at everything that once triggered you and smile with detachment. Not because you've gone cold, but because you've gone conscious. And that changes everything. Arguments lose weight. Passive aggression doesn't sting. Fake invitations don't tempt. You know your value now. You've felt the difference between attention and presence, between manipulation and influence. And most importantly, you've learned to protect your energy, because you now see giving access is giving power. Want to step into this version of yourself? Start by breaking the impulse to respond immediately. Next time someone tries to provoke you, don't react. Just pause. Watch. When you realize that your silence bothered them more than any comeback ever could, you'll feel the shift. Then start filtering your time. Decide who gets your conversation, what topics are worth your attention, for how long. Build that invisible wall, not of arrogance, but of self-respect. You'll lose some people, but the ones who remain will start changing. Being unreachable also means mastering perception. People will try to decode you. They'll imitate you, mimic your tone, copy your posture, hoping to steal your influence. But what they don't realize is, it's not the silence that holds power. It's the intent behind it. It's real detachment, inner peace, the absence of ego. That can't be faked. That can't be learned overnight. It's behavior shaped by depth, awareness, and time. It's clarity matured into discipline. And then comes the paradox. The more distant you become, the more they chase you. The less you speak, the more they want to hear you. But now, you choose when. You decide if. You are emotional scarcity in a world overdosed on excess. You are strategy in a world ruled by impulse. You've become the standard, the quiet benchmark, the reference everyone uses to measure their own behavior. You don't need to remind anyone of your power. You are the reminder. And maybe this was the goal all along. Not to be the loudest, not to be the most seen, but to be the one they quote, even in silence. The one who proved just by being that real power never begs, that true intelligence needs no announcement, that authority doesn't ask permission. It just is. And everyone feels it. But now imagine this. What happens when someone like that chooses to speak again? What happens when they move just one piece? Now tell me, how many times have you tried to be heard when what you really needed was to be feared? How often have you stretched a conversation out of guilt when your silence could have said everything? How many times did you hide your intelligence just to avoid disturbing someone else's ego? But what if, starting today, you played a different game? What if, instead of reacting, you started choosing? Instead of explaining, you became unreachable? You don't need to justify yourself. You just need to be remembered. And when you learn to disappear with intention, you stop being just another name in the room and become the standard everyone else adjusts to. So let me ask you, are you still trying to be understood? Or are you finally ready to become impossible to ignore? If this message spoke to something deep inside you, if it named a part of you that no one else ever saw, then subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications, and stay right here, because the next silence you hear might just change everything.